Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with another episode of Market Monday. Due to time constraints for this week, I am just going to go off the script here and do the typical let's talk about a topic and see where there's some investment opportunity. This week, I'm going to talk about reprints from Iconic Masters and specifically how they are going to impact Modern. So I've made a top 10 list of cards that are being reprinted in Iconic that affect specifically Modern. And we'll start off with an honorable mention, but before we do so, I just want to talk a little bit about Iconic Masters. Iconic Masters kind of threw us all a curveball. I really thought we were going to see cards like Lightning Bolt and Liliana the Veil and Shivan Dragon, those type of cards that are very iconic to the Magic the Gathering, but it looks like the next Master Set 25 is going to be more iconic cards than actual iconic. In fact, we are all joking that the Iconic Masters ended up being like Modern Masters 4, as it really focused on the Modern format. It seems like out of the Mythics at least, every color had one Commander card, one Modern card, and one Legacy card. There was some exceptions. There were some colors that just plain missed the Legacy reprint. But then if you go down into the rares, we saw a ton of Modern specific cards, and we'll talk about those cards and how I think they'll lead to some buying sprees, or at least some people trying out different archetypes, as now they're very accessible with the reprints. A lot of times all it takes is an expensive card being reprinted, even if it doesn't necessarily hold a huge value in the deck, but most of these do that are reprinted. It's still going to be, if a card is $20 rather than $50, for example, that $50 price tag is going to keep people, if they need 4 of them in a deck, it's going to keep a lot of people from building that specific deck. So anyway, let's just go down the list. The first one here is an honorable mention. This one is going to be the Mishra's Bauble, and the reason why it's only honorable mention, if this would have been 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago, this would have been way higher up on the list, because this was a pivotal piece in the kind of the Jund version of Death Shadow, or I guess it'd be 4 colors at that point, and some of the other decks that are trying to get the Death Shadow or the Tarmogoyf really big with the Mishra's Bauble. This sort of strategy has fallen out of favor for the regular Death Shadow build, just the Grixis Death Shadow, where they're trying to play more of an attrition war rather than an all-in. So the old school Death Shadow decks used to throw like Mishra's Bauble, and then they'd run the tribal Tarfire, and that gave them either they had a huge Death Shadow you had to deal with, or a huge Tarmogoyf that you had to deal with. And again, a lot of those strategies have fallen out of favor for the Grixis, more the attrition / control version of the deck. And Mishra's Bauble, as you can see from this price tag, let's pull it up here, was already on its way out. I mean, since it spiked up, highest price was right here, right after the Modern Masters 3 release, and then you can see it is just fallen and fallen and fallen. I mean, even before the announcement, it was down to $27. It had already decreased over half of its value, just due to the shift in the meta, or the shift in how people were building Death Shadow. It is still a very good reprint, though. It might actually start to show once this is going to get really cut down, probably down to less than the $10. I would say that since this is an uncommon, it'll be down to the 5, maybe even lower mark. The whole reason why this was very expensive is it was out of Cold Snap, and Cold Snap is very rare. It was an unpopular set. It wasn't reprinted a lot. It entered the time during Magic when Magic was near its all-time low, if not its all-time low, for a long time. What was that, right after Return to Ravnica, or Ravnica set, I believe it was printed, and there was just kind of that entire time of Magic was quite stale, and it didn't fit in a block, so it wasn't really drafted heavily. There's a lot of reasons why Mishra's Bauble was an extremely rare card, and why it was able to go up to that sort of price tag. So again, it would be higher up if this was 6 months ago, but right now with the Mishra's Bauble already on the way out, I think that it is an important reprint, but not as important as it could have been. So let's go on to number 10. Number 10 is going to be good old Primetime, and you can put Anger of Gods in this reprint as well. If you combine the two, Primeval Titan and Anger of Gods, they make Scapeshift about 6% cheaper. Primeval Titan is also in the Amulet Titan, so we're going to pull up, we'll first pull up the Titan Shift deck. And the reason why it's lower on my list is you can see that there is still a lot of pieces to this deck that are much more pivotable and affect the price of this deck. So we have first of all, the Scapeshift. Scapeshift is going to go up in value. It is the #1 deck on MTGO, according to MTG Goldfish right now. And the Scapeshift is the huge factor of why this deck is so expensive. However, it would be, according to this list, it would be the third. We're not going to take into account fetch lands because fetch lands are played in everything. But it would be the third most expensive card on this list next to Chandra. Not all versions run Chandra. Some actually do run other ways to throw in the Primeval Titan. You see this in the Through the Breach decks. You'll see some Primeval Titan decks as well. But Primeval Titan usually is kind of that mid target. It's a $10 card, which isn't that expensive in the scope of things with Modern. So therefore, it's not going to hit high on this list. But it is a very, very significant reprint. And if you look too, most of these decks also run Anger of the Gods, which was a huge kick in the teeth to me because I did pump in a ton of money to Anger of the Gods once Dredge started to become a tier 1 deck, and the investment was going strong until, of course, that inevitable reprint. So anyway, Primeval Titan will decrease the value of this deck to make it a little more accessible. People opening this might be like, oh, maybe I'll build Scapeshift. So the card for this one that I would start to look at would be Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. This card has started to already see a very significant price increase, I would say. Like this, you got to take this spike away. These things are buyouts. Buyouts eventually stabilize, and usually what happens after a buyout like this is it starts to go back down to where its real value is. But you can see this buyout actually did its job, and it went from the $3 or $4.50 up to $9, so it doubled its value, and it actually stayed consistent. So I think we're at where we should be anyway. So if you follow this kind of price trajectory of Battle for Zendikar being, or Oath of the Gatewatch being at around the $4.50, and that was in start of 2016, so we're nearing the end of 2017 at a double up basically in the price of the card. And so I don't think another $4.50 is or another $4, $5 is unreasonable for Valakut by the end of 2018. And so that would be my spec for this particular deck. I think Scapeshift is just it needs a reprint. I think that it's going to be in the 25. It's going to be either there or it has to be thrown in some sort of other. I'm very surprised it wasn't printed in this one because of there's like a landfall type in this, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe they're saving this for the Modern Masters. The next Modern Masters 4 is kind of the chase card with Scapeshift, but I think it's so due for a reprint, and I think it's a lot easier to reprint than Valakut, but Valakut could be a reprint as well. Another card that I have just for this particular deck that I have been investing in is Cinderglade. We'll talk about that in another video. Probably the market or the rogue market that's going to come out either next week or later on this week. I have to take care of some. My mom just got out of surgery, so I'm going to drive down and stay with her for about a week or sometime, at least a couple days, just to help her out while she's recovering from surgery. But then after that, we'll hit the Market Mondays and the Rogue Markets hard. And this is definitely a topic I want to talk about is the rotating cards. And Cinderglade is very, very high up on my list due to this Scapeshift archetype. So anyway, the next one coming at number 9 is kind of a cluster of cards in the Kiki Core deck. So we saw Magus of the Moon reprinted, we saw Restoration Angel reprinted that just did get a reprint, and we saw the Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker. And so if you combine all of these together, it's about 9 to 10% of the overall value of these decks. Some of these decks, you can see this one has a Horizon Canopy in it, which takes up a huge chunk. That's actually getting a reprint as well. We'll talk about that, of course, later on. But I think this is significant enough pieces in this archetype are getting a reprint. Magus of the Moon might just start to see a lot more play, just as it's not a $32 card. I've had it in other decks in the past, and then ended up cutting it just because it just wasn't worth a sideboard option at $30. People do underestimate the role that the price of cards actually does have in Modern. If people don't think it plays a role, you haven't met the average Joe. And a lot of people do get into Soul Sisters, for example, because it's a budget deck, or a lot of these other decks that don't cost an arm and a leg. And when they see this, how much does Magus the Moon actually affect this deck? I don't know. Possibly not even that much. And so they'll just cut this when they're looking to build this deck and they have to cut an option. They'll cut Magus. I think, though, Magus going down in value will start to have it being included in a lot of decks. And so I think it will stabilize a lot more. It is just a one of in a lot of these decks. And it was the whole reason it has such a high price tag is it was in the Future Sight, which is extremely rare. So between Kiki-Jiki and Restoration Angel, I think that this deck will start to see a little bit more play. There isn't a lot of cards that I think you can just specifically pick out in this deck. Maybe like Court of Calling to see a price tag, or the Eldritch Evolution could see a price increase. Eldritch Evolution, of course, is rotating, but it sees no pressure from Standard at the moment. And so this is pretty good, pretty much stabilized at the moment. Eldritch Evolution is another card, speaking of Cinderglade, in the previous pick that I have been sinking some money into just because it does see a significant amount of play in Modern. So again, a 9% decrease overall, or 9% of the deck, of this particular deck, is held up in the Restoration Kiki-Jiki, Magus the Moon. You also see Restoration Angel and a few other decks. And so those are significant reprints in Iconic Masters, but this particular one I don't see anything that just completely is out of place or is due for a price increase. Speaking of which, I can't believe Iconic Masters did not have a Birds of Paradise in it. Nothing more iconic than Birds of Paradise. All right, so on to my number 8. Number 8 is another kind of cluster of cards, and this is Burn. Burn sees some significant reprints in 6% of the deck is held in these type of cards, and if you take out the fetch lands, it is a lot more of this deck is bottled up in the Lightning Helix, Monastery Swiftspear, and Riftbolt. Now, Riftbolt did just get a reprint, so it is very, very... it's only, what, $1.50 now, a Riftbolt? This should significantly go down. Lightning Helix as well should significantly go down, and it is going to lead to some more burn. Goblin Guide has stabilized out around $15 now, so Goblin Guide should start to go up, and same thing with Eidolon of the Great Revel. Eidolon has been experiencing a little bit of a down, but again, it was due to this buyout. These eventually stabilized themselves to the real market value, and so you can see it went from 6 to 12, and now it's kind of stabilizing out around the $10 mark. I think Eidolon is a good little pick. Can it see a reprint? Absolutely. It's tough to reprint this card, though, and it is the significant chunk of change now between this and Goblin Guide for burn decks, besides the fetch lands, which I think the fetch lands are due for a reprint. They might be saving it for Modern Masters 4, and just throwing in the cons fetch lands in that. But I think that if Wizards is going to make Modern accessible, it's definitely the fetch lands that need to be targeted. But I think both Goblin Guide and Eidolon of Great Revel are good little pickups right now, because they're the most expensive uncommon got a reprint, and one of the more expensive common/uncommons got a reprint, and the Swiftspear gets stabilized here. What we were going to start to see with Swiftspear was this card to kind of flatten out at around the $2 range, and I wouldn't be surprised if this starts to go up as the pressure from Modern Burn is going to outstretch the supply of the Swiftspear. All right, so the next cluster of cards is going to be Soul Sisters. I've got this coming in at number 7, and you can see that Soul Sisters, my version of the deck that I'm playing right now, is about 55% of the deck, of the value of the deck, is being reprinted in the form of Archangel of Thune, Sarah Ascendant, Johnny's Pridemate, and what was the other card that gets reprinted in this set? Oh, Ariak Champion, which is a very significant reprint. So all of these are going to collapse in price, and Ranger of Eos just got a recent reprint. One of the Soul Warden just got a recent reprint. So this deck is insanely cheap at the moment to build. So where I think the value will go up is Honor of the Pure. Honor of the Pure hasn't had a reprint in quite some time, and I believe it hasn't had. We'll double check this here in a second. Yeah, it's stabilized around the $2 mark. I think this could be going up to a $3 price range. The other card, too, you want to keep your eye on is definitely going to be both Leyline of Sanctity, because this is going to see a lot of play in another archetype, and Flagstones of Trocaire. Flagstones is not a necessary card in this deck. It just makes your Ghost Quarters a lot easier. It gives them a target if you're going against a deck that doesn't have a purpose for Ghost Quarters. So those are everything in this entire deck. You can see that the huge chunks are getting those reprints. And so you might see an increase in Soul Attendant and Honor the Pure. Maybe even a more significant increase than I'd imagine in those two cards. So I think that that might be smart to put some money in those, because Soul Sisters is always going to be there. You go to a Grand Prix, you're going to go, if you walk around the tables, you're going to see people playing it. It's a very popular deck with people that actually play the deck. I, of course, am one of those. I absolutely love the deck, as it is a great metagame choice when the Burn and Delver and kind of the attrition-based decks are very popular. Soul Sisters can just wipe out a metagame when they're decks like Scapeshift and Tron aren't being played. It's an insanely good deck against the rest of it. It's decent versus control, great versus attrition, great versus aggro, and it's just those really non-interactive decks like Scapeshift, what I call the time clock decks, that Soul Sisters has a tough time against. So maybe some of these pieces that did not get reprinted, Ranger might have seen its bottom at the $1.90 mark. I think it still has a little bit more, maybe the $1.50. Once it hits that, and with these other reprints, Ranger could definitely see some recovery back to the $3 mark. So I think Ranger's a decent little pickup here. And just Soul Sisters in general, all the ones that did not get the print in there, should increase quite a bit, as, like I said, about the 55-60% of the deck value is being reprinted. So that's going to make the price of Soul Sisters come down incredibly low. You should see this down to what? Yeah, I would say this should be down under a $300 deck. And if you have Flagstones or Trocaire underneath that, it's back to a budget deck. All right, so on to my number 6. Number 6 is going to be Glimpse of the Unthinkable. And the reason being is that this is basically the big price point in the mill decks. You can make a mill deck for very, very cheap now with Glimpse of the Unthinkable getting the reprint. This is going to easily half the value of Glimpse of the Unthinkable, and there wasn't a good list to pull up from. This one, of course, is high because it's using fetch lands and whatnot, but mainly in the mill based strat. I say you could build probably a mill deck for the $300 mark, and so having $125 of that being reprinted is very significant. And so you might want to look at cards like Mesmeric Orb or Archive Trap to be good pickups. You can find other cards that have been played in this in the recent, like the Fraying Sanities, as well as the Startled Awake. So just all of the usual suspects for mill, Surgical Attraction Visions, those type of cards, Hedron Crab, all of these could get a reprint. Or, excuse me, get a price increase because of Glimpse of Unthinkable. So it's just some food for thought. I don't necessarily like to invest in decks that have never proven themselves, but this seems to be like when a lot of casual players want to enter Modern, a lot of times they just go for this deck. Mill players love Mill, and they're going to play it whether it's good or not. So I think that there is some merit in investing in some of these other Mill pieces that the price of Glimpse of the Unthinkable being reprinted can alleviate. So, on to my number 5. This one is a really, really good one, which is Cryptic Command. Cryptic Command holds about 10% of the value of a lot of the control decks, or just the decks that it sees play in at the moment. Most of these are around $1,000 decks. The fetch lands have a lot to do with them, but let's just pull up like a U-White control. Ancestral Visions also is being reprinted, which is significant. The whole problem with Ancestral Visions is it has fallen out of favor in the recent months, and it's actually very, very tough to even find a deck that is including it at the moment. But you might see these U-White controls actually throw Ancestral Visions back in the mix, as it is a great way to fill back up the hand. But you can see in almost every, I'm surprised this one has a 3 of. Most of these are 4 ofs with the Cryptic Commands. Now I'm looking at it, there's all a bunch of 3 ofs, so womp womp there. But it goes beyond U-White control that plays it. Basically any sort of blue control shell plays the Cryptic Command. You can see that it's a very significant player in these decks. So you can see the price of most of these Supreme Verdict also did get a reprint, so you can kind of throw that in the shell of the white control. So it might bump up these Jace Architect of Thoughts or these Gideon type cards and see some price increase of them. Celestial Colonnades, another good one. Again, it goes even, Snapcaster Mage, it goes even beyond the white control archetype. Just any blue control shell should have, I mean, this being printed is going to, people, we call it the Tarmogoyf effect. It happened in Modern Masters 1. People opened up Tarmogoyf from Modern Masters 1. They're like, oh, I'm going to fill out my playset. And then all the decks that used Tarmogoyf had a significant increase because it brought people to playing that archetype. You might see that with Cryptic Command. People open up a Cryptic Command. Oh, okay, cool. I have my Cryptic Command. Maybe I might as well get the other 3. And we'll play you white control shell. And so you can see all the other cards that go in this archetype could see a significant, like a 10% increase, for example, due to the reprinting of Cryptic Command. All right, on to number 4 is another good one that holds about 15% of the archetype's value, which is Bloodghast. Bloodghast sees play in Dredge. It has seen a very, very significant increase after its banning of its buddy, the Troll, but people have determined that Dredge is perfectly playable still without the Golgari Grave Troll. And you can see it's the second most expensive, no, it is the most expensive card right now in the deck. And you can actually see Dredge is pretty budget. It's probably going to go down about the $500 range after Bloodghast gets the reprint. I don't think anything else was reprinted out of this, correct me if I'm wrong, out of this archetype. But you can see there's not a lot of expensive pieces left besides the fetch lands of this. There's still Life from the Loam, and everything else is incredibly budget. So we could see a increase, especially to like the Golgari Thug or the Narcomoeba. Keep your eye on Prized Amalgam when it hits its bottom. It's a good time to invest in these, as well as the Neonates. Stinkly Imp could see a price increase, or just Life from the Loam can get the kind of the brunt of the price decrease of Bloodghast. It's just the game we play in Finance. One card goes down, another card goes up. The value is going to stay there. The more players entering the scene, and this should get a significant amount of players in the modern format, the price needs to go somewhere. And so in this particular deck, I expect it to go into Golgari Thug and Narcomoeba. Both of those could easily see reprints. Dredge is a tough mechanic to reprint, though. So we'll just have to wait and see with some announcements of what the next sets for 2018, all the specialty sets are, whether or not we pull the trigger on these specific cards a lot more. But Bloodghast, again, Bloodghast is the expensive card in this. You should see an influx of Dredge players and the rest of these cards going up in value. All right, now we're on to the really, really juicy stuff. This is at number 3, we have Grove of the Burn Willows and Oblivion Stone. I'm going to throw them both in the same category because they are both played heavily in the red-green Tron. And if you combine the two, they make about a quarter, 25% of the price of red-green Tron. Now, red-green Tron has fallen out of favor, but you might see red-green Tron start to increase due to the amount of control decks. Tron has notoriously been the control killer. It's because eventually you're going to find that card that is uncounterable and it is going to slip through the control, and like the Ulamogs, for example, or you can just start doing multiple things per turn where it's hard for control to counter multiple things per turn and stick that threat to where it's tough for control to come back. You can also see that this card has started to see a huge price decrease. This was mainly due to the fact that red-green Tron fell out of place to kind of the Fatal Push or Path to Exile Tron, so either white-green Tron or black-green Tron. But there's enough Tron decks going around that, let's find a red-green one here, that I still think, here we go, is significant. If a go-wide strategy ever is popular again in Modern, like Affinity, for example, red-green Tron is so much better at combating those than either black-green or white-green. The thing that led to the rise of white-green and black-green Tron was Death Shadow. Death Shadow's on its way out. Well, it's not seeing nearly as much play as it once did. It was kind of the boogeyman of the format. We're starting to see go-wide strategies like Dredge and Affinity come back, and red-green Tron is just miles better at playing those against those particular decks, as has access to like Pyroclasm and Anger of Gods for the red portion of it. But I mean, they're very similar decks. They do run Oblivion Stone, so whether or not whatever version Oblivion Stone does go in them, and it's a significant player in the deck. We can see the price of Karn Liberated or Ugin go up in value, or Wormcoil Engine and Ulamog once Ulamog stabilizes. So just some food for thought. Again, if people open up Groves, it could lead to the, oh, I'll build Tron now. So now that it's accessible, now that I have some of the pieces to it. So this one, I've been keeping my eye on Sylvan Scrying once it bottoms out. That's been, it's again, once I talk about rotating cards, it's definitely on my list. Ancient Stirrings definitely does need a reprint, and Karn Liberated needs a reprint before I think that Tron is accessible. I really expected Karn Liberated to be an Iconic Masters. I think that 25 is I really think that Karn Liberated will be reprinted in 25. I think both Liliana and Karn Liberated will be kind of the chase cards out of that set, and then they have a lot of more legacy type cards to print for that. 25 is supposed to showcase a card from each set, I believe, or at least block. They want to represent, 25 years of Magic, and I don't think anything from this block is more iconic than Karn Liberated, and same thing with Liliana. And I think they'll go back to their 2 Planeswalkers, and maybe even 3, Jace, Karn, and Liliana in that set. Anyway, that's just some speculation. Now we're on to the extremely significant cards, which I do think, you can wash away the rest of the video, and these 200% will have an impact on the market. And the first one being Horizon Canopy. Horizon Canopy is going to make Bogles spike up, the other cards out of Bogles. You can see that it's played in Counters Company, Elves, Death and Taxes, Bogles. The 2 significant decks that it's played in is Elves, the Elves deck that is running the Vizier of Remedies. You can see it's a 3 of in this deck, and it actually holds almost 50% or 40% of the value of the Elves deck just in 3 Horizon Canopies. And this is back to being a budget deck, sort of. It's pretty easy to build at the moment anyway, without the Horizon Canopies. But the deck that this is going to make a significant market impact in is going to be the Bogles, as it has over a 55% of the value of Bogles. So the 2 cards that I have been sinking some money into is Daybreak Coronet, as well as the Core Spirit Dancers. They're both 4 of. They're both next in line as the most expensive card, except for Leyline of Sanctity. Leyline of Sanctity is another one that it should shoot up in value. Leyline of Sanctity's been shooting up in value to begin with. But I think that the ones that have the most potential are definitely going to be Daybreak Coronet and Core Spirit Dancer. So if you haven't started targeting these, I highly recommend doing so, as this is going to be a very budget deck. Leyline of Sanctity isn't a must in this deck. It's good versus I would say, significant amount of decks. Very good against Death Shadow and Jund and Abzan and anything that runs like the Thoughtseize Inquisition package, as that's one of the worst things for Bogles is those particular cards. Where Bogles really shines is when like Jeskai Control or White Control sees a lot of play, because it is just miserable for those decks to play against Bogles, as you give them hexproof and then you give them a way to come back with the Umbras, and a very good matchup versus Jeskai and White Control. So if you don't take anything from this deck, those are two cards that I have been investing in a substantial amount of money, as Daybreak and in Core Spirit Dancer. Now on to my number 1. Number 1 is going to be Aether Vial. Aether Vial was a much needed reprint. You can see the trajectory of this card has just been going up and away. And the reason being it's running Eldrazi Taxes, it's running Death and Taxes, it's running Merfolk. Now I would suggest sinking some money in Merfolk, but we know there's a dual deck coming out, so let's wait. Once the dual deck comes out, the cards that are not reprinted in the dual deck, Goblins versus Merfolk, or yes, Goblins versus Merfolk, right? We are going to sink a ton of money in those. Now, one of my specs did get killed in Merfolk, which was the Harbinger of Tides, is printed in Commander. I do expect Curse Catcher to get a reprint in from the dual deck. And I also think that either Lord or Master is going to get a reprint as well. So Silvergill Adept, I think, is going to be in that deck as well. Kira might actually get replaced by a Merfolk that does a similar ability, maybe not, out of Ixalan. And then one of these may get a reprint in the dual deck. If not, whatever the missing link is, we are going to sink a lot of money, whether it be Master of Waves or one of the Lords that did not get reprinted And you got to think too that Iconic might, or 25 might have Lord of Atlantis. That's a very real. But either way, the Aether Vial is around 30% to 40% in most decks that it is being run in of the value of the deck. And this was the one card. You can see that everything else, a playset for $35 is very reasonable. People will pick up playsets of cards for that amount. And this Mutavault could go up in value. It's been sneaking up on us. This is a card that has never really hit the top movers and shakers. But you can see that since it hit its bottom at around the $10 mark here after rotation, it is now up to about $12.75. Just kind of snuck up on us. That's a really good indication of a card, a very healthy card. And with the Aether Vial reprint, I think that's a very, very significant. This could lead to a very significant increase. So if it did, it could easily get reprinted in Goblins versus Merfolk. I could see them putting a Mutavault because it's you could put it in either one of the decks and it works good. And it's a card that is easily reprinted in a ton of box sets or even I could see. I don't know. I have a hard time seeing it being reprinted in a standard base deck, but you never know if they want Mutavault. It tends to ruin the formats that it gets reprinted in. It just becomes too oppressive of a card. It's hard for standard to get the value that Mutavault provides. But anyway, keep an eye on Spreading Seas too. It hasn't seen a reprint in a long time. Or has it ever even seen a reprint? This card could continue to go up in value. I don't know. I like the Merfolk. The ones we need to wait for Merfolk for the card to invest in. Other than that though, Eldrazi and Taxes does get some look how much of the value the Aether Vial holds from Eldrazi Taxes. You can look at Thalia as a great pickup, or even cards like Eldrazi Displacer once it hits its low, or the Thought-Knot-Seer / Wasteland Strangler. I am sinking money into all of those once they hit their low. And again, that's another video for another day. Eldrazi Temple might go. Eldrazi Temple is probably too high to invest in at the moment anyway. But where I do like this too is just the regular Death and Taxes, where it holds another really significant chunk of change. By far the most expensive card. So Thalia thinks in 25, I think Thalia will be possibly the rare that gets printed out of this block. So we'll see like Thalia and Liliana, in my opinion. I don't know. But Restoration Angel got a reprint here too. Leonid Arbiter you could start to sink some money into it after it sees its low from Commander. It has being reprinted, but you can see everything else is really, really low out of the Death and Taxes. So I think Thalia is the right place, but I wouldn't be, you can sink some money to Thalia, but you need to sell immediately because I think this is just too risky for that 25 reprint. So anyway, that's my list of the most significant reprints for Modern out of Iconic. Iconic does seem to be, it's going to be a huge player in Modern. It also is a clear indication from Wizards that they are going to support the format. Now, I think that they do need to start throwing in fetch lands in the... why was a fetch land not in the Commander set? They should have put a fetch land in each one of them. So a Windburst Heights in the... a Windswept Heath in the Cat deck, a Polluted Delta in the Dragon deck, you could put a Bloodstained Mire in the Vampire deck, and that I would preferred, and the Wizard deck could have had something, or Wizard could have Polluted Delta. I'd prefer they start putting a one of in each one of them. There is the fear that what that ends up happening is people just buy out the deck to piece it out and sell. Who cares? The reprints need to enter somehow. The fetch lands need a significant reprint. I hate having them just be money grabs for master sets, but it appears they're going to do that the Modern Masters 4 will probably have all the fetch lands in it again, as you have a ton of $20 at that point lands from Khans of Tarkir, and the Modern Masters 3 lands should at least all still be above the $20 mark, with the Scalding Tarn approaching 60-70 at that point. Probably even more, because we do have a year and a half before that set comes out. Anyway, what do you think about this list? Is there any cards that I just missed? I probably did miss some uncommons from this that might impact the market more significantly. We'll get into Rogue Market later on this week. Again, I will be busy this week, but I'll try to have it out sometime, which will be a fully edited and scripted video. Anyway, this has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching.